General Kale Varan had commanded 17 campaigns across 6 star systems, and in all those years he had never once asked the Galactic Throne for mercy. He had commanded soldiers through worlds where the sky burned for weeks, through orbital sieges where entire cities disappeared beneath plasma bombardment, and through the Karun Rebellion, where 300,000 Imperial soldiers had died before the enemy finally surrendered. Kale had always believed that war was a matter of decisions. A commander studied the enemy, calculated the cost, accepted the losses, and moved forward. Mercy belonged to diplomats. Fear belonged to civilians. Soldiers had orders. That was why, on the day the Galactic Throne summoned him to the Imperial Council chamber, nobody expected the most decorated general in the Dominion to say the words that would eventually make him a traitor. Leave them alone. The council chamber of Ver was large enough to hold the representatives of 47 worlds, but Kale barely noticed them as he entered. His attention went immediately to the enormous holographic display floating above the central platform. A small yellow star burned in the darkness, surrounded by several planets. One of them was highlighted in blue and green: Earth. To most members of the Galactic Throne, it was an insignificant world on the edge of known space. Its civilization had only recently developed practical faster-than-light travel. Its military fleet consisted of a few dozen experimental vessels. Its orbital infrastructure was primitive, its weapons were inefficient, and its governments were divided among competing nations. By every measurement the Galactic Throne used to judge civilizations, humanity was weak. Kale had come to the council to tell them that those measurements were wrong. At the far end of the chamber sat Chancellor Valor, the political head of the Galactic Throne. Beside him stood Minister Salvik, Director of Strategic Expansion and one of the most influential military politicians in the Dominion. Salvik looked at Kale with the faint smile of someone who already knew the conclusion of a meeting before it began. General Varan, the Chancellor said, "You have completed your assessment of the Terran species." Kale stopped beneath the holographic Earth. "I have. And your recommendation?" Kale looked at the planet for several seconds before answering. "Leave them alone." Silence spread across the chamber. Then someone laughed. It was a quiet laugh at first, followed by several others. Salvik did not laugh. He simply raised an eyebrow. "General, perhaps you should explain yourself." Kale turned toward him. "Humanity has not attacked the Galactic Throne. It has not violated Imperial territory. It has not threatened our worlds. It has barely entered the interstellar community. There is no strategic necessity for war." Salvik gestured toward Earth. "There is a strategic necessity for everything we do. Earth possesses valuable resources, a developing industrial base, and a position that could eventually become important. We have encountered primitive civilizations before. They either join the Dominion or resist until they understand the consequences." Kale's expression hardened. "Humanity isn't like the others." The Chancellor leaned forward. "You have said that twice in your report. I want specifics." Kale nodded and expanded the holographic display. Images appeared across the chamber. A damaged human spacecraft drifted through the darkness. Another showed a human mining colony surrounded by debris. Then came a tactical recording from an earlier encounter. 6 months ago, one of our reconnaissance groups encountered a Terran exploration fleet near the Vesta system, Kale said. The Terrans were ordered to withdraw. They refused. Salvik shrugged. Then we destroyed them. Yes. Kale changed the display. 27 human vessels were engaged. 23 were destroyed. 4 escaped. Salvik smiled. That hardly supports your argument. Wait. Kale brought up another image. 11 days later, we encountered those same 4 ships. Several ministers leaned forward. They had been repaired, Kale continued. Their armor had been redistributed. Their engines had been modified. Their communications had been encrypted differently. Most importantly, their attack formations had changed. The Chancellor frowned. They learned from the engagement. Exactly. Salvik waved his hand dismissively. Any competent military would analyze a defeat. Not like this. Kale's voice became quieter. We defeated them again. But they survived long enough to damage one of our cruisers. Their third attack came 17 days later. By then, they had developed a countermeasure against the weapon that destroyed them the first time. The chamber became still. Kale looked around the room. You are all focusing on what humanity has today. That is your mistake. I am looking at what humanity does after it loses. Salvik folded his arms. They lose. Yes. Kale nodded. They lose badly. They lose ships, soldiers, equipment, territory. But then they ask why they lost. They change their tactics. They rebuild. They try again. The Chancellor studied him. And you believe that makes them dangerous? No, Kale replied. I believe it makes them unpredictable. He paused before continuing. The Galactic Throne has defeated thousands of civilizations. We know how most species behave when faced with overwhelming force. They negotiate. They surrender. They retreat. Their leaders calculate the cost of resistance and eventually decide survival is more important than pride. Kale pointed toward Earth. Humans calculate differently. They also value survival, but they seem willing to endure extraordinary losses if they believe surrender will make the future worse. One of the older ministers spoke from the side of the chamber. General, are you suggesting they do not fear death? Kale shook his head. Of course they fear death. That is precisely what makes them dangerous. They know what death means. They simply don't believe fear should make their decisions for them. Salvik gave a short laugh. Poetry, General. We need military analysis. Kale looked directly at him. Fine. Here is the military analysis. Give humanity 5 years, and they will understand our technology. Give them 10, and they will understand our tactics. Give them 20, and they will begin designing weapons specifically to defeat us. Give them a century, and I don't know what they become. The Chancellor's expression darkened. You are asking the Galactic Throne to fear a species that cannot even defend its own planet. No, Kale answered. I'm asking the throne to avoid turning a developing civilization into an enemy that has learned the galaxy is hostile. For the first time, the room felt completely silent. The Chancellor looked back at the holographic Earth. What exactly happened during your first encounter with them? Kale's expression changed. It was subtle, but everyone noticed. They sent a message. What message? The Chancellor asked. Kale hesitated. We demanded their surrender. Their commander replied that they couldn't guarantee victory, but they could guarantee that we would regret trying to take their home. Salvik smiled. An empty threat. Perhaps, Kale said, but I believed him. The Chancellor stood from his throne. General Varen, the Dominion cannot allow sentiment to determine strategic policy. This isn't sentiment. Kale's voice hardened. It's experience. Your recommendation is noted. Kale immediately understood what those words meant. His warning had been heard, but not accepted. The Chancellor turned toward the Council. Operation Quiet Star is hereby authorized. The Terran civilization will be given a final opportunity to submit peacefully. If it refuses, the Dominion will neutralize its military infrastructure and assume control of the Sol system. Kale stepped forward. Chancellor. The room became quiet again. I strongly advise against this. Your advice has been recorded. Then record this too. Kale stared directly at the Chancellor. If you attack Earth, do not expect the war to end when you win the first battle. Salvik shook his head. There won't be a war. Kale turned toward him. There will be. And why are you so certain? Salvik asked. Kale looked once more at the small blue planet floating above them. Because humanity doesn't know how powerful the Galactic Throne is. He paused. But once we attack them, they will learn. The meeting ended without another word. Kale walked through the enormous corridors of the Imperial Palace while the doors closed behind him. Outside, thousands of ships moved through the sky above Vare, each carrying soldiers who believed they were protecting civilization from another threat that would soon surrender. Kale stopped beside a transparent observation wall and looked toward the distant stars. He had spent his entire life serving the Galactic Throne. He had believed in its order, its laws, and its purpose. But for the first time in his career, he felt something he had never felt before after receiving military orders. He felt dread. Somewhere beyond those stars was a small blue planet filled with people who had no idea what was coming. They did not know the size of the fleet being assembled against them. They did not know how advanced the enemy's weapons were. They did not know that the most powerful empire in known space had just decided their world was worth conquering. Kale closed his eyes and whispered the words he knew nobody in the council wanted to hear. They should have left humanity alone. Then, far away in the Sol system, a human telescope detected the first unknown object crossing the edge of its territory. Humanity had just been noticed by the Galactic Throne. It had no idea that the throne had already made its first mistake. Commander Elias Ward had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous sound in a military command center was silence. Alarms could be dealt with. Warnings could be analyzed. Even explosions gave you information. Silence meant nobody knew what was happening. At 3:17 Coordinated Earth time, the command center beneath the Australian desert went completely silent. Every conversation stopped at once as the main tactical display filled with unidentified contacts. Elias had been awake for 31 hours, surviving on coffee and short periods of sleep in a chair beside the communications console. He walked toward the display and stared at the growing cluster of lights. "How many?" he asked. Lieutenant Sarah Chen looked at her station. "We don't know. Give me an estimate." 2,000 confirmed contacts. Possibly more. Elias stared at her. 2,000 what? Chen swallowed. Ships. The command center had been built to survive the worst war humanity could imagine. Its walls were reinforced against nuclear strikes. Its communication systems were buried hundreds of meters underground. It had independent power generators, water reserves, and enough food to support its personnel for more than a year. None of those preparations had considered an enemy arriving from another star. Humanity had discovered practical faster-than-light travel only 17 years earlier. The first successful jump had lasted 3 seconds. The second lasted 9. The third killed 6 engineers. By the 7th attempt, scientists finally stabilized the system long enough to send an unmanned probe beyond the solar system. Humanity had celebrated that achievement as the beginning of a new era. It had never occurred to them that someone else might already be watching. Elias looked at the tactical display again. "Where are they?" Chen pointed toward the outer system. "They're still outside the main defensive perimeter." "Are they transmitting?" "Yes." A communication officer turned in his chair. "Sir, we've received a message." "Play it." The room filled with an unfamiliar voice. It was deep, calm, and strangely emotionless. "This is the Galactic Dominion Expeditionary Fleet. The planet designated SOL-3 is instructed to identify its governing authority and prepare for immediate submission to the Galactic Throne. Failure to comply will be considered an act of resistance." The message repeated once. Then the room went quiet. Elias looked at Chen. "Galactic Dominion? That's what they called themselves. Do we have any records of them?" "Nothing." Elias looked at the stars displayed across the screen. "Then answer them." The reply took less than a minute to prepare. "This is Commander Elias Ward, acting representative of the Terran Defense Authority. We have no record of your government, your laws, or your authority over this system. Explain your purpose and establish diplomatic contact." The response arrived almost immediately. "Your species has been granted an opportunity to surrender peacefully. You will dismantle your military forces, surrender strategic facilities, and accept administration by the Galactic Throne." Elias stared at the message. "That's their diplomatic proposal?" Chen nodded. "Apparently." Elias rubbed his eyes. "Tell them no." The communications officer hesitated. "Sir? Tell them Earth will not surrender its sovereignty." The message was transmitted. For several minutes nothing happened. Then the alien response appeared. "Terran refusal has been recorded. Military compliance will now be enforced." Elias watched the display as the first alien vessels began moving. "How long?" he asked. Chen checked the calculations. "Approximately 6 hours before they reach the first defensive perimeter." Elias nodded. "Wake everyone." Chen looked at him. "Everyone?" "Every command center. Every fleet. Every reserve unit. Tell the governments we have confirmation." "Confirmation of what?" Elias looked at the screen. "We're not alone." Within minutes, the information spread across Earth. Governments that had spent decades arguing over borders suddenly had a much larger problem. Emergency meetings began in Washington, Beijing, Moscow, Delhi, London, Brasilia, Cairo, and dozens of other capitals. Civilian communication networks flooded with speculation. Some people believed the visitors were peaceful. Others believed the entire event was a hoax. By sunrise, humanity had its answer. The first alien fleet appeared above Earth's orbital plane without warning. Thousands of vessels emerged from faster-than-light transit in coordinated formations. They were enormous compared with human spacecraft. Their hulls were dark metallic structures built around smooth, curved armor. Human radar systems struggled to track them. Satellite sensors overloaded. Several communication networks failed simply because they had never been designed to process so many unknown signals at once. Elias stood inside the command center while the first orbital defense stations activated. "Target the lead vessels," he ordered. "Do not fire until they're inside range." Lieutenant Chen looked at him. Our range or theirs? Elias paused. Ours. The first human missiles launched 6 minutes later. Hundreds of them climbed from orbital platforms and accelerated toward the alien formation. For a brief moment, the command center erupted in cheers as several missiles appeared to hit their targets. Then the celebration died. The missiles had struck invisible barriers surrounding the alien ships. The warheads exploded harmlessly against shimmering fields of energy. Shielding, Chen whispered. We knew they had shields. Knowing and seeing are different things, Elias replied. He watched as the alien fleet continued forward. Then the alien ships opened fire. Thin beams of blue-white energy crossed the darkness. 3 human defense platforms disappeared before anyone could react. A 4th broke apart seconds later. The command center went silent. Return fire, Elias ordered. Human railguns fired from the orbital platforms, sending dense metal projectiles across thousands of kilometers. Several struck alien ships. One vessel appeared to lose part of its outer armor, and another changed course. Elias leaned forward. We can hurt them. The statement lasted less than 10 seconds. The alien formation changed. Their shields adjusted. Their weapons concentrated on the damaged human platforms. One after another, Earth's orbital defenses began disappearing. Human fighters launched from lunar bases and attempted to attack the alien fleet from multiple directions. The alien response was immediate. Their smaller ships moved faster than anything human pilots had ever encountered. Fighter after fighter vanished from the tactical display. How many have we lost? Elias asked. Chen didn't answer. Lieutenant, too many. How many? She looked at him. 83 fighters, 6 defense platforms, 2 lunar stations. Elias swallowed. And their losses? The tactical officer beside Chen answered quietly. 3 confirmed destroyed, maybe 5 damaged. Elias looked back at the display. Humanity had just lost hundreds of lives to destroy 3 enemy ships. The technological gap was no longer theoretical. It was absolute. Order the fleet to withdraw, Elias said. Chen stared at him. We're retreating? We're surviving. The distinction mattered. The battle continued for 47 minutes. Earth lost 12 orbital defense platforms, 38 fighters, and thousands of personnel. The alien fleet lost fewer than 20 vessels. When the order finally came to disengage, human ships retreated toward the inner system while the alien fleet remained in orbit. The first battle was over. Earth had lost. There was no heroic victory hidden inside the numbers. No secret human weapon had suddenly appeared. Humanity had been outmatched, and everyone in the command center knew it. Elias stood alone after the battle, staring at the casualty reports. Sarah Chen approached quietly. You should rest. Elias shook his head. How many? The final number isn't complete. Give me the estimate. Chen hesitated. 18,000 military personnel confirmed dead or missing. Elias closed his eyes. And civilians? We don't know yet. 3 days later, the first piece of alien technology fell into human hands. A damaged reconnaissance vessel had entered Earth's atmosphere after its propulsion system failed. It crashed into the Pacific Ocean, killing most of its crew. The surviving aliens were taken into custody, while the wreckage was transported to a secure research facility. Elias arrived there personally. Scientists had already surrounded the vessel with equipment. What do we have? He asked. Dr. Meera Patel, Chief of Advanced Systems Research, pointed toward the alien hull. A propulsion system we don't understand, an energy system we barely understand, and a shield generator that makes every physicist in this building want to resign. Elias almost smiled. Can you learn anything? Eventually. We don't have eventually. Meera looked at him. Then we learn quickly. For the next 48 hours, the scientists worked without meaningful sleep. They discovered that the alien shields were not simply walls of energy. They were constantly adjusting frequencies in response to incoming attacks. Their shields learn, Meera explained during a briefing. Elias frowned. Like adaptive software? Exactly. When a weapon strikes, the shield records the energy pattern and adjusts. Elias looked at the technical display. Then how did our railguns damage that ship? Meera enlarged the data. Because physical impact creates a secondary energy fluctuation. Their shields weren't optimized for it. Can we exploit that? Maybe. She hesitated. But if we use the same method twice, they'll probably adapt. Elias stared at the screen. Then we don't use it twice. Meera looked at him. What are you thinking? Elias answered quietly, I'm thinking we only need to surprise them once. 11 days after the first battle, the alien fleet returned. This time, humanity was waiting. Earth still couldn't match the Dominion fleet. Human ships were still slower. Their weapons were still weaker. Their shields were still inferior. But hidden inside the command network was one new piece of information. Elias watched the enemy formation approach and waited until the lead vessels entered range. Hold, he ordered. Chen looked at him. Commander, they're almost on top of us. Hold. The alien fleet continued forward. Now, hundreds of human weapons fired simultaneously. Railguns, missiles, and modified kinetic projectiles struck the same sections of the alien shields. For 0.7 seconds, the adaptive systems became overloaded. The first alien ship lost its shield. A human missile struck its exposed hull. Then another. The vessel broke apart. The command center erupted with noise, but Elias didn't celebrate. Again, he ordered. The second attack destroyed another vessel. Then a third. The alien fleet immediately changed formation. Their shields adjusted. Their defensive patterns changed. The human attack became less effective with every passing minute. By the end of the engagement, humanity had lost 31 ships and thousands more personnel. But 17 alien vessels had been destroyed. It was still a defeat. Yet for the first time, the Galactic fleet had been forced to retreat from an objective. Far away, General Kale Varan watched the battle report in silence. The numbers were clear. Human losses were catastrophic. Galactic losses were still relatively small. Yet Kale ignored both figures. He was studying something else. The changes between the first and second battles. The Terrans had identified the shield weakness, tested it, and used it once before the enemy adapted. Kale leaned back slowly. They're learning, he whispered. His aide looked confused. General? Kale kept his eyes on the image of Earth. I warned them. The aide waited. The throne believes it is invading a weak civilization, Kale continued. But every battle is teaching that civilization how to fight us. He looked toward the distant blue planet. And we have just given them their first lesson. On Earth, Elias Ward received the casualty report, looked at the destroyed alien vessel on his screen, and said the words that would define the war to come. Next time, we learn something else. The third month of the war began with silence. There were no victory broadcasts from Earth, no speeches from government leaders, and no celebrations for the 17 alien ships humanity had destroyed in the previous battle. The losses were too heavy for that. Across the planet, families were still waiting for news about missing soldiers. Hospitals were operating beyond capacity. Factories that had once produced civilian vehicles were now building ammunition, drones, armor, and spacecraft around the clock. The alien fleet had withdrawn from Earth's immediate orbit, but nobody believed it had retreated permanently. Humanity had won something more important than a battle, but it had also learned a painful truth. The Galactic Dominion could adapt too. Commander Elias Ward stood inside the underground command center, watching a tactical simulation replay for the 7th time. The screen showed the second battle in slow motion. Human weapons struck the alien shields. The shields failed for less than a second. Human missiles destroyed several ships. Then the enemy adjusted. Stop there, Elias said. The simulation froze. Lieutenant Sarah Chen looked at him. What do you see? Elias pointed toward the alien formation. They changed their defensive pattern after the third strike. We already know that. No. Look closer. Chen stepped toward the display. Elias continued, they didn't simply strengthen the shields. They changed the formation of the ships around the damaged vessels. They were protecting the same weakness before we could exploit it again. Chen frowned. Meaning? Elias looked at her. Meaning they're learning just as quickly as we are. Dr. Meera Patel entered the command room carrying a tablet. Commander, we have another problem. Elias turned. How bad? The captured propulsion system just became useless. Chen looked surprised. It stopped working? Meera shook her head. No. We figured out how it works. Elias waited. Then what's the problem? Meera placed the tablet on the table. The alien system uses a material structure we can't manufacture. We can understand the mathematics, but we don't have the industrial capability to reproduce the components. Elias stared at her. So we can't copy their technology. Not yet. How long? Meera hesitated. Years. Elias nodded slowly. That answer was better than impossible, but not by much. Then we don't copy it, he said. We find out what we can build with what we have. Mira studied him for a moment. That's going to be harder. Elias looked at the casualty reports displayed behind her. Everything worth doing is. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Throne had a very different interpretation of the second battle. Minister Salvik stood before the Strategic War Council while a holographic reconstruction of the Sol system floated behind him. The Terran resistance is stronger than predicted, he admitted, but their industrial capacity remains limited. Their fleet losses are unsustainable. An admiral beside him nodded. Our losses are equally manageable. Salvik smiled. Exactly. The second engagement proves General Varen's fears were exaggerated. A senior strategist looked at the data. Then why did the fleet withdraw? Salvik's expression tightened. Because the commander chose caution. And General Varen? Someone asked. Still under restriction, Salvik replied. He has been ordered to remain outside operational command. The Chancellor listened from the elevated throne. How long until Earth falls? The strategist calculated for several seconds. 6 to 8 months. The Chancellor nodded. Then proceed. Nobody in the chamber questioned the prediction. On Earth, the war changed everything. The world's governments had begun sharing intelligence at a level that would have seemed impossible before the invasion. Nations that had spent generations competing with one another were now combining scientific research, military resources, and industrial production. It wasn't perfect. Arguments still happened. Political leaders still disagreed. Some governments wanted negotiations while others demanded total resistance. But the alien threat had created something humanity had never possessed before. A common problem larger than its differences. Elias understood that unity could disappear the moment people became convinced the war was hopeless. That was why he refused to promise victory. During the worldwide emergency broadcast, a journalist asked him, Commander Ward, can humanity win this war? Elias paused before answering. I don't know. The journalist looked surprised. That's your answer? Yes. Elias continued, but I know this. If we stop fighting because we are afraid we might lose, then we guarantee the outcome. The broadcast ended with no dramatic speech. But across millions of homes, people understood the message. The next major battle took place near Mars. The Galactic Dominion wanted the planet because its mineral resources could support a prolonged campaign. Humanity knew it couldn't defend Mars conventionally, so Elias ordered the fleet to fall back. We're abandoning the planet? Admiral Chen asked. We're giving them the planet, Elias replied. There's a difference. Chen stared at him. Explain. Elias brought up the tactical map. The Dominion has enormous fleets, but their supply lines are still tied to the outer system. If they establish a major base on Mars, they'll have to protect the ships supplying it. Chen slowly understood. You want them to build the base. Elias nodded. I want them to believe they're winning. 3 days later, human forces withdrew from Mars. The Dominion fleet entered orbit without opposition. Its commanders interpreted the retreat as a sign that Earth was finally weakening. For several weeks, alien construction ships worked around Mars. They built fuel stations, communication arrays, repair docks, and defensive platforms. Human satellites watched from a distance. Elias ordered his commanders not to attack. Some officers considered the decision insane. We're watching them build a fortress in our own system, one commander complained. Elias answered, no. We're watching them build a supply chain. When the construction was complete, the Dominion began moving thousands of ships through the Mars corridor. Then Elias gave the order. Human vessels emerged from hidden positions across the asteroid belt. They did not attack the main fleet. Instead, they targeted fuel transports. The first transport exploded, then another, then a repair vessel. Within hours, the Dominion supply network around Mars was under attack. Human forces withdrew before the main fleet could respond. The battle cost humanity 6 ships. The Dominion lost only 4. Yet the strategic result was significant. The alien fleet had been forced to slow its advance. General Kale Varen received the report aboard a remote military station. He read it without speaking. His aide watched him carefully. They used the Mars withdrawal as bait. Kale nodded. Yes, but the losses were small. The losses aren't the point. Kale looked at the tactical map. They're beginning to understand logistics. His aide frowned. Is that unusual? For a young civilization, yes. For a civilization at war, no. Kale zoomed in on the human positions. But they're learning unusually quickly. He paused. That's what concerns me. His aide hesitated. Should we inform the throne? Kale gave a bitter smile. I already did. And? They told me to stop interfering. Kale had expected that answer, but it still angered him. He remembered the first time he had encountered human forces near Vesta. They had been disorganized, inexperienced, and technologically inferior. Yet their commanders had refused to behave according to the expectations of the galactic military doctrine. They had continued fighting after losing communications. They had reorganized after losing their flagship. They had sent damaged ships back into combat because there were no replacements. At the time, Kale had considered it reckless. Now he understood that recklessness had been forced upon them by necessity. Humanity had never enjoyed the luxury of fighting wars according to perfect doctrine. It had learned to operate under uncertainty because uncertainty was all it had ever known. 6 months into the conflict, the Dominion launched another major offensive. This time, humanity was ready with more than weapons. Engineers had developed new electronic countermeasures based on information recovered from the captured vessel. They couldn't reproduce alien systems, but they could interfere with them. Human ships began carrying devices that created false sensor signatures. Some projected dozens of imaginary vessels. Others disrupted enemy targeting for seconds at a time. None of these technologies were decisive by themselves. Together, they forced the Dominion to spend more time identifying real threats. That delay was enough for human ships to strike and retreat. The Dominion began losing control of the tempo of the war. But adaptation came at a price. One night, Elias received a message that his younger brother Daniel had been killed aboard a civilian evacuation vessel. The ship had been carrying families away from a threatened coastal region when an alien reconnaissance craft attacked it. Elias read the report alone. Sarah Chen found him an hour later sitting in the dark. Elias. He didn't answer. I'm sorry. He looked at the casualty report in his hand. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the fighting. Chen sat beside him. None of them were. Elias was silent for a long time. Then he said, I used to think winning meant destroying the enemy. Chen looked at him. And now? Elias looked toward the tactical display. Now I think winning means making sure there are still people alive when this ends. The war continued. Every month, humanity became harder to defeat. Not stronger than the Dominion. Not more advanced. Harder to defeat. The difference mattered. The galactic fleet still possessed superior weapons and faster ships. It could destroy human formations whenever it caught them in open combat. But human commanders stopped giving it those opportunities. They fought from hidden bases. They attacked supply lines. They changed routes constantly. They abandoned positions before the enemy arrived. Every retreat was calculated. Every loss was studied. Every captured piece of technology was examined until its secrets were exhausted. Then the Dominion finally understood what was happening. A classified report reached the Galactic Strategic Council. It contained one sentence that caused even Minister Salvik to stop smiling. Terran military effectiveness has increased by 41% since the beginning of the war. The Chancellor looked at the report. How? The analyst swallowed. They are incorporating battlefield experience into doctrine faster than our predictive models anticipated. Salvik shook his head. They're still losing. Yes. Then why does this matter? The analyst looked at him. Because their rate of improvement is increasing. Nobody spoke. Far away, Kale Varan received the same report. He read it once and closed his eyes. The throne still had more ships. More weapons. More resources. More worlds. By every conventional measure, humanity remained hopelessly outmatched. But Kale knew conventional measurements were becoming meaningless. He looked toward the stars and whispered, "You're running out of time." His aide asked, "Who are you speaking to?" Kale looked at the distant glow of the Sol system. The throne. He paused. And humanity. Back on Earth, Elias stood before a new tactical display. The blue planet behind him was surrounded by hundreds of human ships that had not existed a year earlier. They were smaller than Dominion vessels, slower than Dominion vessels, and less powerful than Dominion vessels. But they were human. Sarah Chen entered the room. "Commander, we have another transmission from the Dominion." Elias turned. "What do they want?" "They're offering surrender terms." Elias almost laughed. "After everything?" Chen nodded. Elias looked at Earth for several seconds before answering. "Tell them no." "Are you sure?" He turned toward her. "No," Elias said. "I'm not sure about anything anymore." He looked back at the stars. "But I know we're not the same species that entered this war." And somewhere beyond the Sol system, General Kale Varen heard the news. For the first time since the invasion began, he wasn't afraid that humanity would lose. He was afraid of what humanity would become if the Galactic Throne refused to stop. Because the throne still believed it was teaching humanity how to surrender. It had not yet realized that it was teaching humanity how to fight. By the beginning of the second year, the Galactic Dominion had stopped calling the conflict the Terran Pacification Campaign. The official documents still used those words, but among commanders the war had acquired another name, the Sol Quagmire. The Dominion still controlled more territory, possessed more ships, and had access to industrial resources humanity could not even imagine. Yet the war that was supposed to last 6 months had entered its second year, and Earth remained free. Worse, every attempt to push deeper into the Sol system became more expensive. Human forces no longer tried to defeat Dominion fleets directly. They attacked communications, fuel convoys, repair vessels, sensor stations, and isolated ships. They disappeared before larger forces arrived. The Dominion could win almost every individual engagement and still find itself losing ground strategically. Commander Elias Ward had become one of the most recognizable military figures on Earth, although he disliked the attention. He had been promoted twice since the beginning of the war, but he still spent most of his time inside command centers rather than government buildings. One evening, Sarah Chen entered his office carrying a report. "We lost another colony," she said. Elias looked up from his display. "Where?" "Europa." He froze. "How?" Chen placed the report in front of him. "The Dominion found one of our communications relays. They followed the signal and attacked the settlement." Elias read the casualty estimate. "How many survivors?" 23,000 evacuated. At least 60,000 confirmed dead. Elias closed the report. "And the fleet?" "We arrived too late." He stared at the table for several seconds. "They are learning too." Chen nodded. "Yes." Elias looked toward the tactical display. "Then we have to learn faster." The following months brought a change in the war that neither side had expected. Humanity had begun producing ships at a remarkable rate, not because its technology had suddenly become equal to the Dominion's, but because human engineers had learned to build simpler vessels faster. Terran ships were smaller, easier to repair, and deliberately designed around replaceable systems. A damaged engine no longer required an entire ship to return to Earth. A destroyed weapon module could be replaced at an asteroid station. Human factories began operating inside hollowed asteroids, beneath lunar craters, and inside abandoned mining facilities. The Sol system slowly transformed into an enormous network of hidden workshops and military outposts. The Dominion could still destroy human ships. But it was becoming harder to find them, and even harder to prevent replacements from appearing. General Kale Varen watched these developments from the military observation station where he had been confined since his disagreement with the throne. He had spent months submitting reports, strategic warnings, and recommendations for withdrawal. Almost none had received a response. Finally, he requested another audience with Chancellor Valor. The request was denied. He requested another. Denied. A third. Denied. Then, unexpectedly, the Chancellor summoned him. Kale entered the council chamber and immediately noticed something different. Minister Salvik was no longer smiling. A large holographic map of the Sol system filled the room, covered in red markers. The Chancellor spoke first. "General Varen, you have been asking for an audience for months." Kale looked at the map. "Because the situation has changed." "We know. Then you are finally listening." "We are listening to everyone." Kale stepped closer to the display. "How many ships have we lost?" Salvik answered. "Enough. That isn't a number. 14,000 military vessels over 22 months. Kale remained still. "And Terran losses?" "Far greater." Kale looked at him. "Then why are you worried?" Salvik's expression hardened. "Because they are replacing their losses faster than predicted." Kale nodded. "Exactly." The Chancellor raised a hand. "Enough. We have considered your warnings." Kale looked at him. "And?" The Chancellor's voice became cold. "We have reached a different conclusion." A new designation appeared above the map. Operation Black Dawn. Kale read the name. "What is it?" Salvik answered. "The final solution to the Terran resistance." Kale's eyes narrowed. "Occupation?" "No." Salvik touched the display. Several human population centers appeared. "We will destroy their military-industrial capacity." Kale stared at the highlighted cities. "Those are population centers." Their military is embedded within their civilian infrastructure. Then you are proposing mass civilian casualties. Salvik's expression remained emotionless. We are proposing an end to the war. Kale turned toward the Chancellor. Withdraw. The Chancellor stared at him. What? Withdraw from Sol. Establish a blockade. Offer negotiations. Salvik laughed bitterly. After 2 years of war? Kale ignored him. You have already taught humanity everything they need to know about us. Another year will make this worse. The Chancellor stood. General, you seem unable to understand the political reality. Kale's voice remained calm. No, I understand it perfectly. You need a victory. The Dominion needs stability. Then don't turn Earth into a graveyard. The Chancellor's expression hardened. You will not lecture the throne. Kale stepped closer. I am not lecturing you. I am warning you. He pointed toward Earth. If Black Dawn is executed, there will be no peaceful surrender. There will be no stable occupation. You will create a civilization whose only remaining objective is to destroy the Dominion. Salvik shook his head. They already want to destroy us. Kale looked at him. No, right now they want to survive. The Chancellor dismissed him. Kale walked out of the chamber believing the argument was finished. He was wrong. 3 days later, his command access was restored. Not because the throne had changed its mind, but because Black Dawn needed an experienced commander. Kale was ordered to oversee the operation. He read the orders alone. The first phase involved orbital bombardment of human military installations. The second phase targeted industrial centers. The third phase would destroy selected population centers believed to support the resistance. Kale read the document twice. Then he contacted his fleet commander. Prepare the ships. The officer sounded relieved. Yes, General. Kale looked at the final page. But we will not execute Black Dawn. Silence followed. General? Kale closed his eyes. You heard me. The officer's voice dropped. That is treason. Perhaps. Kale disconnected. For the next 6 days, Kale quietly contacted commanders he trusted. Some refused immediately. Others asked questions. A few agreed. By the end of the 6th day, 47 ships had pledged loyalty to him. It was not enough to defeat the Dominion. Kale knew that. He wasn't trying to win a civil war. He was trying to prevent a massacre. On the 7th day, he transmitted his refusal to the throne. General Kale Varen speaking to all Dominion forces assigned to Operation Black Dawn. I have received the order to destroy Terran population centers. I will not execute it. Any vessel under my command is ordered to stand down from offensive operations against civilian targets. The response arrived within minutes. General Varen, you are relieved of command pending investigation. Kale answered, acknowledged. Then another message arrived. Failure to surrender command will constitute rebellion. Kale looked at his officers. Then I suppose we know what comes next. The first shots of the Dominion civil conflict were fired above Saturn. Kale's fleet was outnumbered almost 3 to 1. He ordered his ships not to destroy enemy vessels whenever possible. Their objective was to escape. The battle lasted 4 hours. Human observers watched from hidden positions and initially assumed the Dominion had launched another attack. Then they realized something strange was happening. Dominion ships were fighting one another. Elias received the report while reviewing a convoy route. Confirm that. Chen nodded. Confirmed. General Kale Varen has rebelled against the throne. Elias stared at her. The general who warned them about us. Yes. Elias stood. Can we contact him? We've tried. No response. Elias looked toward the stars. Keep trying. Kale's flagship emerged from the battle damaged and missing most of its escort. He knew the throne would pursue him. He also knew humanity had to be warned. His communications officer approached him. General, we've established a narrowed transmission channel into the Sol system. Kale nodded. Send it. What should I say? Kale looked at the damaged bridge around him. Tell them the truth. The message crossed the darkness between stars. Elias received it 23 minutes later. Kale's face appeared on the screen, exhausted but composed. Commander Ward, you do not know me personally, but you know my name. I warned the throne to leave humanity alone. They refused. Now they have decided that they cannot conquer you, so they intend to destroy your ability to resist. Elias listened without speaking. Kale continued. Operation Black Dawn will begin within 6 weeks. It will target your industrial centers, military facilities, and population centers. I cannot stop the entire Dominion, but I can give you this warning. He paused. Prepare for the largest attack of the war. Elias finally spoke. Why are you helping us? Kale looked directly into the camera. Because I was a soldier before I was a servant of the throne. The transmission ended. Chen stared at Elias. Can we trust him? Elias considered the question. I don't know. Then what do we do? Elias turned toward the tactical display. We prepare anyway. He began issuing orders. Move the remaining shipyards. Disperse the fuel reserves. Shut down every unnecessary communication relay. Begin civilian evacuation from the most exposed regions. And tell the government something important. Chen waited. Elias looked at Earth. The next phase isn't about defending every city. Then what is it about? Elias answered, making sure humanity survives even if we lose them. Far beyond the Sol system, the Galactic Throne officially declared Kale Varan a traitor. His military record was erased from public archives. His 17 campaign victories were removed from history. His name was forbidden in several Dominion academies. But among the soldiers who had served under him, the order produced a very different reaction. Some quietly questioned the throne. Others began refusing orders. The rebellion was small, but it was spreading. The Chancellor responded by accelerating Black Dawn. The attack would no longer wait 6 weeks. It would begin in 3. When Elias received the update, he stood silently before the window of the command center. Earth filled the glass, blue and white beneath the darkness of space. Sarah Chen approached. 3 weeks, she said. Elias nodded. I heard. Can we stop them? Elias looked at the planet. Not completely. Then what are we going to do? He turned toward her. We're going to make them pay for every kilometer they take. Chen frowned. That sounds like a final stand. Elias shook his head. No. He looked at the tactical display as hundreds of human positions began disappearing from it, deliberately going dark. A final stand ends somewhere. He smiled faintly. We're going to give them nowhere to finish. 3 days later, the largest Dominion fleet ever assembled began moving toward the Sol system. Thousands of warships gathered around a single command vessel. Their orders were simple. Break humanity's resistance permanently. On the bridge of that fleet, the new Dominion commander watched Earth grow larger on the tactical display. Prepare Black Dawn, he ordered. This time, there will be no retreat. At that exact moment, deep inside the Sol system, hundreds of hidden human facilities came alive. Shipyards opened. Engines ignited. Mining stations changed their coordinates. Thousands of drones disappeared into the asteroid belt. And beneath Earth's surface, Elias Ward looked at the approaching enemy and gave the order that would begin humanity's most dangerous strategy yet. Let them come. The first warning appeared at 4:12 Earth Standard Time. It was not an explosion, an alarm, or a transmission from the enemy. It was a change in the stars. Thousands of distant points of light suddenly disappeared as the enormous Dominion fleet emerged from faster-than-light transit beyond the outer edge of the Sol system. For several seconds, the human tracking network struggled to process what it was seeing. Then the numbers stabilized. Over 12,000 Dominion warships had entered the system, supported by carriers, repair vessels, fuel ships, troop transports, and mobile command stations. It was the largest military force humanity had ever witnessed. Commander Elias Ward stood silently before the main tactical display. Sarah Chen walked toward him. Is that the entire fleet? She asked. Elias shook his head. No. Chen looked at him. How can you possibly know that? Elias pointed toward the outer edge of the display. Because they brought enough logistics vessels to support another fleet. Chen stared at the screen. Then this isn't an invasion. Elias looked at her. No. It's an execution. The Dominion transmitted its final demand before the fleet advanced. The voice belonged to High Commander Sarek, the officer chosen to complete Black Dawn. Terran forces, your resistance has continued beyond all acceptable limits. The Galactic Throne offers one final opportunity. Dismantle your military forces, surrender all strategic facilities, and accept Dominion administration. Refusal will result in the termination of organized Terran resistance. Elias listened to the message without expression. Chen asked, what should we send back? Elias looked at the blue planet behind the tactical display. Tell them we've received the message. And? Nothing else. Chen stared at him. That's it? Elias nodded. Let them wonder. The response was transmitted. The Dominion fleet began moving inward. Humanity's first defense line was not the fleet. It was a network of automated sensor stations hidden throughout the outer system. Their purpose was not to stop the Dominion. It was to measure it. As the alien fleet advanced, thousands of human sensors recorded engine frequencies, shield emissions, communication patterns, formation changes, and supply routes. The information flowed toward Earth through narrow-beam laser transmissions. The Dominion destroyed many of the stations as it discovered them, but by then their data had already been transmitted. How long until they reach the asteroid belt? Elias asked. A tactical officer answered, 9 hours. Elias nodded. Then we have 9 hours to learn everything we can. The first human ships appeared 6 hours later. They did not attack the main fleet. Small groups of Terran vessels emerged from hiding, fired missiles at isolated reconnaissance ships, and immediately withdrew. Dominion commanders pursued them. The humans disappeared into the darkness. Another group appeared 50,000 kilometers away. Another attack. Another retreat. The pattern repeated again and again. High Commander Sarek watched the tactical display with growing frustration. They're wasting ships, his aide said. Sarek shook his head. No, they're wasting our time. He studied the map. Order the fleet to ignore them. The Dominion formation continued forward. 10 minutes later, 3 human ships attacked a fuel convoy. 2 were destroyed. The third escaped. Sarek clenched his jaw. They're testing our response. His aide asked, should we pursue? Sarek answered, no, but the word came too late. The humans had already learned what they needed. The Dominion reached the asteroid belt at 1840. That was when the real battle began. Thousands of human drones emerged from the rocks, not carrying powerful weapons but metallic debris designed to interfere with sensors and navigation. The Dominion fleet attempted to clear the field with energy weapons. The resulting explosions created clouds of dust and fragments that made the sensor problem worse. Human ships attacked from behind the debris, fired, and vanished. The Dominion responded with overwhelming force. Entire sections of the asteroid belt were blasted apart. Human vessels were destroyed by the hundreds. But every attack pushed the Dominion deeper into the region Elias had prepared. Sarah Chen watched the tactical map. We're losing ships. Elias nodded. I know. A lot of ships. I know. She looked at him. When do we stop? Elias answered, when they reach the place we need them to reach. The Dominion fleet finally broke through the asteroid field. Its commanders believed they had won the first phase of the battle. More than 600 human ships had been destroyed. Several hidden stations were gone. The main Dominion fleet remained almost entirely intact. High Commander Sarek transmitted across the fleet. Terran forces are withdrawing. Advance toward the inner system. The order was obeyed. What Sarek did not know was that the human retreat had been deliberate. For 18 months, Elias and his engineers had studied Dominion logistics. The alien fleet could travel enormous distances, but its weapons, shields, and engines consumed enormous amounts of energy. Every major vessel depended on supply ships. Every repair vessel depended on specialized materials. Every communication relay depended on stable energy links. The Dominion had more ships than humanity. It did not have unlimited fuel. The second phase began near Mars. Human forces had abandoned the planet months earlier, allowing the Dominion to construct enormous supply facilities around it. Now hundreds of human attack groups emerged from hidden positions throughout the system. They ignored the Dominion warships and attacked the support fleet. Fuel ships exploded. Repair vessels vanished. Communication stations went dark. Human ships attacked for minutes and then withdrew. The Dominion fleet tried to respond, but its commanders couldn't protect everything at once. Protect the fuel transports, Sarek ordered. They're attacking the repair vessels. An officer shouted. Then protect both. We don't have enough ships. Sarek slammed his hand against the command console. Then find them. Elias watched the battle from Earth. How many fuel vessels destroyed? He asked. 132. Repair vessels? 78. Communication relays? 41. Chen stared at the numbers. We've barely damaged their main fleet. Elias nodded. We don't need to. She looked at him. What happens when they run low? Elias answered. Then they become a fleet that can't stay. The plan was working, but it was costing humanity everything. More than 2,000 Terran ships had already been destroyed since Black Dawn began. Civilian evacuation routes were collapsing. Several cities had been hit by orbital weapons. Millions had been displaced. Earth was surviving, but barely. Then the Dominion changed strategy. High Commander Sarek ordered the fleet to stop pursuing human ships. Instead, the main armada turned toward Earth. They're ignoring our attacks, Chen said. Elias looked at the display. Yes. Why? Because they believe they can finish this before their supplies become critical. He studied the fleet's new trajectory. They're going straight for Earth. Chen looked worried. Then our plan failed. Elias shook his head. No. Now they are doing exactly what we needed. He gave a new order. Begin evacuation of the southern defense zones. Shut down the western orbital network. Prepare the lunar stations. Chen stared at him. You're abandoning them. We're abandoning positions. People are still there. Elias's expression hardened. Then get them out. The Dominion fleet reached Earth's outer defenses 12 hours later. The sight was overwhelming. Thousands of alien vessels surrounded the planet, their weapons glowing against the darkness. Earth launched everything it had left. Human fighters poured from hidden bases. Orbital platforms fired missiles. Railguns launched dense projectiles. The battle became chaos. Dominion ships destroyed defense platforms by the dozens. Human pilots attacked alien vessels at point-blank range. Entire formations disappeared. Cities beneath the battle watched the sky burn. For the first time in the war, the Dominion had reached the moment it had always expected, the final defense of Earth. High Commander Sarek transmitted to the fleet. Destroy the remaining military infrastructure. The first orbital bombardment began. Human bases disappeared beneath waves of energy. Elias watched the tactical display as one position after another went dark. Sarah Chen looked at him. We're losing. Elias nodded. Yes, Commander, what are we waiting for? Elias looked at the clock. The right moment. For what? He didn't answer. Then the Dominion fleet received a strange transmission. It came from the far side of the Sol system. General Kale Varen appeared on the screen. His flagship was damaged, and only a few dozen ships remained behind him. High Commander Sarek, Kale said, you have been warned. Sarek's expression hardened. Traitor. Kale ignored the insult. Your fleet has entered a system where you no longer control the supply routes, communications, or navigation network. Sarek laughed. You brought 47 ships to stop 12,000? Kale shook his head. No. He looked toward Earth. I brought 47 ships to make sure they get their chance. Kale's fleet attacked the Dominion's rear communications vessels. It was not enough to destroy the fleet, but it created confusion. Several Dominion formations lost contact with their command network. Then Elias gave the order. Phase 7. Across the Sol system, hidden human engines activated. Old mining stations became missile platforms. Abandoned factories launched autonomous drones. Thousands of small vessels emerged from moons, asteroids, and hidden orbital shelters. They did not attack the main Dominion fleet. They attacked everything that kept it functioning. Fuel depots exploded. Repair stations vanished. Navigation beacons were destroyed. Communication relays went silent. The Dominion fleet suddenly found itself surrounded by darkness. Sarek shouted, "Restore the network." An officer answered, "We can't." Why? Because we don't know where the attacks are coming from. Sarek looked at the tactical display. His enormous fleet was still stronger than humanity's remaining forces. But the map was changing rapidly. Hundreds of Dominion ships were isolated. Others were running low on energy. Some could no longer receive orders. The fleet had entered the Sol system as an unstoppable force. It was now thousands of separate groups fighting independently. Elias watched the display. Now, he said quietly. Human ships attacked. For the next 6 hours, the battle became a war of movement. Humanity still lost ships by the hundreds, but every destroyed Dominion vessel was becoming harder to replace. Human forces struck isolated groups, withdrew, and attacked another. They never stayed long enough for the larger Dominion formations to respond. The alien fleet tried to regroup, but each attempt was disrupted by another attack on its communications or fuel supply. Slowly, painfully, the enormous armada began moving outward. Sarek finally understood. He had not been defeated by a superior fleet. He had been denied the ability to use his superior fleet. Order withdrawal, he said. His officers stared at him. Commander? Order withdrawal. The message spread across the surviving Dominion forces. Thousands of ships began retreating from Earth. Some fought their way outward. Others were abandoned when they could no longer move. Human forces pursued only far enough to ensure the fleet was leaving. Inside the Terran command center, nobody celebrated. Elias looked at the casualty display. The numbers were staggering. Cities had burned. Fleets had vanished. Millions were dead. Earth had survived, but it had paid an enormous price. Sarah Chen approached him. They are withdrawing. Elias nodded. Did we win? He looked at the damaged planet behind the display. We survived. Chen waited. Elias finally answered, for now, that's enough. Far beyond Earth, Kale Varen watched the retreating Dominion fleet. His aide asked, do you think the throne understands? Kale looked toward the blue planet. No. He paused. Not yet. Because the Galactic Throne had lost its greatest fleet in the Sol system without ever understanding how. And the war had finally reached the moment Kale had feared from the beginning. Humanity had survived long enough to learn how to defeat an empire without ever becoming stronger than it. The Galactic Fleet did not disappear when it left the Sol system. It continued retreating for 11 days, slowing only when it reached the outer edge of Dominion-controlled space. Nobody on Earth celebrated during those 11 days. The war had ended in everything but name, yet humanity was too exhausted to believe it. Across the planet, emergency broadcasts continued listing the dead and missing. Hospitals were overflowing. Cities were rebuilding around enormous craters left by orbital weapons. Millions of people were living in temporary shelters because their homes no longer existed. The human fleet had survived, but barely. Commander Elias Ward stood inside the same underground command center where the war had begun and watched the final Dominion vessels disappear from the tactical display. Sarah Chen approached him quietly. They're gone. Elias nodded. For now. Do you think they'll come back? Elias stared at the screen. If the throne still believes it can win, yes. 3 days later, the first diplomatic transmission arrived. It came directly from the Galactic Throne. The message was short. The Galactic Dominion requests a ceasefire and formal negotiations. Elias read it twice. Chen looked at him. That's it? That's it. After everything they did? Elias nodded. They don't want to negotiate because they suddenly respect us. Chen folded her arms. Then why? Elias looked at the casualty reports covering the wall. Because they finally understand the cost. Humanity had lost entire cities, thousands of ships, and millions of lives. But the Dominion had suffered something it had not experienced in centuries. A military defeat against a civilization it had considered insignificant. The war had also exposed cracks inside the galactic political system. Several member worlds were openly questioning the throne. Others had begun asking why thousands of soldiers had died fighting a planet that had never threatened them. The ceasefire negotiations began aboard a neutral station positioned between human and Dominion territory. Elias was chosen to represent Earth. He arrived with Sarah Chen and a small diplomatic team. The Dominion delegation was led by Chancellor Valor himself. He looked older than Elias remembered from the original broadcasts. Beside him stood several ministers who had once supported the invasion. Kale Varen was not among them. The Chancellor spoke first. Commander Ward, the Galactic Throne recognizes the cessation of hostilities. Elias answered, you mean your withdrawal? Valor's expression tightened. We are prepared to discuss mutually acceptable conditions. Elias leaned forward. There is only one condition that matters. Which is, you leave the Sol system. The Chancellor stared at him. You are in no position to dictate terms. Elias almost smiled. Neither were you when you arrived. Silence filled the chamber. The negotiations lasted 17 days. The Dominion demanded access to several human resources. Earth refused. The Dominion demanded restrictions on human military expansion. Earth refused. The Dominion demanded that Kale Varen be surrendered as a war criminal. That demand nearly ended the negotiations. Elias stood from his chair. You want the man who tried to stop your massacre? The Chancellor replied, he committed treason. Elias shook his head. Then your laws are the problem. Valor's eyes narrowed. You do not understand the structure of the Galactic Throne. Elias answered, I understand enough. Your general warned you not to attack us. You ignored him. He refused to destroy civilians. You called him a traitor. Then he helped prevent your fleet from destroying Earth. If that's treason, perhaps humanity has a different definition of loyalty. The Chancellor said nothing. Outside the negotiation chamber, Kale Varen waited under guard. He had been captured after the battle and formally arrested by Dominion authorities. He knew what would happen if the negotiations failed. Elias eventually walked into the holding area. Kale looked up. Commander. Elias nodded. General. Kale studied him. How bad? Elias answered honestly. Very bad. Kale lowered his eyes. I am sorry. Elias looked at him. For what? For the war. Elias was silent for a moment. You warned them. I did. You tried to stop it. Not soon enough. Elias looked at him carefully. You couldn't control the throne. Cale shook his head. No, but I served it for most of my life. He paused. That responsibility doesn't disappear because I eventually chose the right side. Elias nodded slowly. Maybe not. Cale looked at him. Then why are you here? Elias answered, because Earth doesn't need another execution. It needs a future. The final treaty was signed on the 23rd day. The Galactic Dominion formally recognized Earth's sovereignty and agreed to withdraw all military forces beyond the Sol system. No Dominion vessel would enter the system without human authorization. Earth would retain control of its colonies and would not be forced to dismantle its military. In return, humanity agreed to establish diplomatic relations and allow limited trade. The most controversial clause involved Cale Varen. He would not be returned to the Dominion. Instead, he would remain free under human protection while his status was negotiated with several neutral civilizations. The Galactic Throne reluctantly accepted. It had wanted revenge. What it needed was peace. When the treaty became public, humanity reacted in ways Elias hadn't expected. There were celebrations, but they were quieter than the ones that had greeted the first human faster-than-light test. People gathered in streets holding flags. Families embraced soldiers returning from underground bases. But there were also millions who simply sat in silence because someone they loved would never return. In one city, an old woman placed flowers beneath a monument made from fragments of a destroyed orbital station. Her son had died during the first battle. A reporter asked her whether she believed humanity had won. She looked at the monument and answered, "My son isn't coming home. So I don't know what winning means." That sentence spread across Earth. It became the unofficial description of the war. The Galactic Throne also changed. The loss at Earth had created political consequences far beyond the battlefield. Several member civilizations demanded representation in military decisions. Others questioned the throne's authority to declare wars without broader approval. Salvik disappeared from public life after the defeat. Chancellor Valor remained in power, but his influence weakened. And inside the military academies, young officers began studying the Sol War. They analyzed every Terran tactic, every human retreat, every supply attack, every technological adaptation. For the first time, the galactic military was studying humanity not as a primitive species, but as a serious strategic power. Cale eventually received permission to visit Earth. He stood on a high observation platform overlooking a rebuilt coastal city. Construction drones moved between damaged buildings. New transport systems crossed the skyline. The planet was wounded, but alive. Elias joined him. For several minutes neither spoke. Finally Cale said, "You rebuilt quickly." Elias looked at the city. "We had practice." Cale smiled faintly. "I suppose you did." Elias looked at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why were you so certain about us?" Cale thought for a moment. "I wasn't certain." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You warned your entire civilization." "I warned them because I recognized something." "What?" Cale looked toward the horizon. "When I first encountered your people, I expected soldiers to behave like soldiers from every other civilization. But your commanders were constantly improvising. Your engineers argued with your generals. Your soldiers questioned orders. Your governments disagreed about strategy. Your entire civilization seemed chaotic." Elias smiled. "That sounds accurate." Cale continued, "At first, I thought that chaos was weakness." He paused. "Then I realized it gave you something our empire had lost." "What?" Elias asked. Cale looked directly at him. "Adaptability." Elias remained silent. Cale continued, "The Galactic Throne has spent thousands of years perfecting its military doctrine. We built systems that could defeat almost any conventional enemy. But because those systems worked so well, we stopped questioning them." He looked toward the city. "Humanity had no perfect system. You had to question everything." Elias nodded. "Every time we lost." "Exactly." The two men stood silently as the sun began to set over Earth. After a while, Elias said, "You know what the strange part is?" Cale looked at him. "What?" "You were afraid we'd become a threat to the galaxy." Cale smiled. "I still am." Elias laughed quietly. "After everything?" "Especially after everything." Cale's expression became serious. "You now have access to technologies you didn't possess before the war. You have a military experienced in interstellar combat. You have colonies outside Earth. And your civilization has learned that the galaxy contains powers willing to destroy you. Elias looked at him. So what should we do? Kale answered immediately. Be careful. That's all? No. Kale looked at the stars. Remember what the war cost. Years later, historians would argue about the Sol War. Some called it the greatest military failure in galactic history. Others called it humanity's first interstellar victory. Some claimed Kale Varen had betrayed his civilization. Others considered him the man who prevented a war from becoming an extinction event. But the official history eventually settled on something simpler. The Galactic Throne had underestimated humanity because it measured strength in ships, weapons, territory, and resources. Humanity had possessed fewer of all four. What the throne failed to measure was the speed at which a civilization could learn when survival depended on it. The final surviving record of the original council meeting was discovered decades later. It contained the moment Kale had first pleaded with the throne to leave humanity alone. In the recording, the Chancellor had asked him why he feared such a primitive species. Kale had answered, I don't fear what they have. I fear what they will learn. For years, historians considered the statement dramatic exaggeration. After the war, nobody did. The Galactic Throne had entered the Sol system believing humanity would surrender after the first defeat. Instead, every defeat became a lesson. Every destroyed ship became data. Every lost colony became a reason to change strategy. Every captured piece of technology became an opportunity. Humanity had never become stronger than the Dominion during the war. It had simply become harder to defeat with every passing month. And when the Dominion finally realized that, it discovered something terrifying. It had spent 2 years teaching a young civilization how to fight an empire. 100 years later, humanity would become one of the most influential powers in the galaxy. But it would never forget the Sol War. Every Terran military academy taught the same lesson: technological superiority does not guarantee victory. Numbers do not guarantee victory. Even strategy does not guarantee victory if the enemy is allowed to learn faster than you can destroy it. And every academy preserved a single quotation from General Kale Varen: leave them alone. The quote was followed by another sentence added after the war: the throne turned a blind eye. And beneath both was the final line, written by a human historian who had survived the first battle of Earth. They should have listened. Kale Varen died peacefully many years later on Earth. He was buried beneath a simple stone overlooking the ocean. His grave carried no imperial medals, no military titles. Only a few words were carved into the surface. He warned them. On the day of his funeral, Elias Ward stood beside the grave and looked toward the horizon. Humanity had ships now that could cross the galaxy in days. It had colonies around distant stars. It had become a civilization the Galactic Throne could no longer ignore. Sarah Chen, now retired, stood beside him. Do you think he was right? She asked. Elias looked at the stars appearing above the ocean. About what? That they should have left us alone. Elias smiled faintly. No. Chen looked surprised. Elias continued, I think they should have met us instead. He looked toward the endless sky. Maybe then the war wouldn't have happened. A distant human spacecraft rose above the horizon, its engines illuminating the night. Elias watched it disappear into the stars. Then he quietly added, but if it had to happen. He looked at Kale's grave. I'm glad he was there. And far beyond the Sol system, on worlds that had once feared the Galactic Throne, a new generation of civilizations was learning the truth of what had happened. The Galactic Throne had not been defeated by the strongest species in the galaxy. It had been defeated by the species it had considered too weak to fear. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. It had simply survived long enough to earn a place in it. And that was the mistake the Galactic Throne would never make again. Never underestimate the species that refuses to stay defeated.